Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be reviewing The Spy Who Loved Me by Ian Fleming. This is the next James Bond book in my series. I'm reading through all of the original Ian Fleming Bond books, and this was the next one up on my list. This will probably be a really short review because this was a very short book. I think this is probably the shortest James Bond book. I think I looked up the page count and it's like 110 pages long. I know the audiobook I finished in basically a day, so it was super short. Barely took any time to get to it, and it is definitely a unique James Bond book. So let's go ahead and just jump right into it with the good. The first thing I thought was good about this book was that we get a completely different POV. Obviously, in most James Bond books, we are following James Bond. He is our point of view character. He is the main character, and that is not the case with this book. In this book, we are actually following a Canadian woman, right? In a James Bond book, a Canadian woman named Vivian Michelle. We get some of her life in England. We get some of her life in after that when she comes back to Canada and all her plans. That's actually kind of how the story unfolds. And I mean, the first like 60, half of this book is before she even comes back as an adult, and it's all her time in England and everything that happened to her there. It was a kind of a refreshing, thing to see. James Bond gets kind of formulaic, and to have just this monkey wrench thrown in out of nowhere, I'm going to count it as a good. It's probably divisive among people who like the James Bond books and the franchise and read them, but I'm going to count that as a positive. Sticking with the positives, and what's so different about this book is just the story itself. It's so different than anything else. You know, if you know anything about James Bond, it's kind of Bond goes on a quest, bad guys, figure out the plan, fight, save the day. That is not the case. A lot of this book is really kind of like the domestic life of Vivian. We, see the struggle she goes through being wooed as a young girl, or not a girl. She's, like a teenager, young adult kind of age range. We see, how that shaped her and the things she went through. We see as she progresses to like a professional in her career, and just like all of these issues she has and faces throughout those time periods. And I'm counting this as a positive, and it makes this barely seem like a Bond book, which is true. But once again, it just was so fresh and different, and it kind of kept me on my toes. I never knew when Bond was going to come in and be a part of this story. I kind of thought he was going to be one of the young men she's dating or something along those lines. So that kept it fresh. It gave me that little bit of anticipation I kind of needed to get through this story. I will also say that this is a very, I don't want to say realistic, but it is a much more grounded, low-level threat kind of a story, even when James does come along. I don't want to say I'd gotten tired of, but the last one, the last Bond book I read, Thunderball, there's just something about it that the stakes were so high, but they also didn't feel like it. Just kind of made the story kind of weird. So, I don't know how I felt. I mean, I gave that book a 3-star. And so kind of peeling back, laying off this big world-ending, high-stakes kind of mission or, scenario that was going on to a much more grounded, couple of gangsters attacking a young lady. That kind of story. I don't know. It was a good take, and I'm going to count that as a positive. I kind of needed a break from the existential crisis. We can't always just have a bigger bad. That's a problem with a lot of like late in the series, especially in like superheroes and video games. It's like, well, how powerful can something get? How big of a crisis can it be before it's just kind of tired? And having this story be much more grounded was a real breath of fresh air. Now let's talk about the bad. And let's just start right off the bat. This wouldn't be an Ian Fleming James Bond novel if there wasn't some very off-color commentary, and just, I mean, this book was written in the 60s, I'm sure you can imagine. It also follows a young woman, and there are definitely some things. I think probably the most, I don't know, there's a lot of things that Ian Fleming has written, but I think the one in this book is probably going to stick with me the most. I won't mention what it is here, but it's something about women, obviously, and how they feel about sex and how they like it. I can put it that way. So, yeah. Just, the whole, and he kind of straddles a weird line because he has this kind of, Vivian is kind of he portrays her as a weak, but then also at the same time doesn't. She becomes very independent and self-sustaining, but she still always needs a man to kind of, keep her going, or, you know, something like that. So, you know, just going to throw that right off the bat with the negatives. If that kind of stuff really bothers you, you're definitely not going to like this book. At this point, if you're reading through all the James Bond books like I am, you're kind of used to it, and you know, you just have come to expect that kind of commentary to be in one of these books. I've mentioned that Bond is barely in this book, and I'm going to go ahead and throw that into the negatives. I feel like I'm kind of going back and forth with this because it felt so fresh, getting just Vivian's point of view and experiencing it through her. But yeah, I could have used probably just a little bit more Bond. Maybe even if we had gotten like a switching point of views where we're following Bond on his timeline and Vivian on her timeline when she gets to kind of where the chunk or the meat of this story takes place. If we could have gotten kind of like converging timelines on like, okay, we know that they're going to intersect, but like how they got to where they are, I don't know, maybe that would have been something, made this story a little bit better. You know, overall, it's fine James not being there, but it doesn't feel like a Bond book without James Bond. And unfortunately, that's, I don't know, 75% of this book before Bond gets involved. So I'm going to go ahead and throw that in the negatives. The last thing that I really think could have improved this book is some tie-ins to earlier in the story. As I mentioned, we kind of grow up with Vivian, not completely, you know, she's, I think, you know, 17, 18-ish when we first meet the first kind of man, which is kind of what the story revolves around in her dating life early on. I think it would have been interesting if the two men that kind of affect her earlier on in her life were somehow tied into the climax of this story. I saw somebody else mention that. I watched somebody rank the Bond books, and they said that same kind of thing. And when they said that, that really clicked for me. It was really true. I think that if the men she was with somehow all came together in the end, and Bond is kind of like the hero. Well, he is always the hero, but the hero that kind of saves her or something. I don't know exactly, but we get all this information on Vivian, you know, growing up and going through these, you know, trials and tribulations, and I don't know, they're building her character, but it doesn't get paid off at any point in the story other than those just being lessons she learned, which is fine. But I think, you know, if somehow they were a part of something that she kind of got back at them at, that would have been great. You know, in reality, what happens is just bad stuff to her that you feel so bad for her and that it keeps happening. And it would have been nice to kind of see her get her, or to, you know, give them their comeuppance. That would have been kind of a nice little tie-in. And just kind of my last overall thoughts. I did end up giving this book a 4-star. I really just think because it was so fresh, you know, I really liked it. It was just such a curveball that, I don't know, it just landed right for me. It was a kind of a return to form, kind of, because it wasn't really a Bond book, and I'm going to stand by that. While Bond is in it, it's really just like a cameo for Bond. But yeah, it is a 4-star, overall good. This was kind of like a palate cleanser Bond book with Bond in it. That's kind of how I feel about it overall. So, you know, you get that dash of Bond, you get just enough to kind of like make you want more again. And I have heard that I think it's either the next book or the one after that is like some of the best Bond. So I am looking forward to that. While I did give this a 4-star, I still think it's probably pretty far down my ranking of all the Bond books I've gotten to. There's maybe only 1 or 2 below it. I mean, I've just really enjoyed a lot of these books. So at some point when I finish this, I'll rank all the Bond books, kind of like I did with The Expanse. But it's a 4-star, but a low 4-star when it comes to the Bond books. But overall, a nice return to form, and I'm excited to continue with Bond. Thanks for watching, and go ahead, like, comment, and subscribe, and I hope you have a good one.